Dawson. More than 2 years since the Uluru Statement, the debate about giving a voice to Indigenous Australians has taken another twist. Today, the Indigenous Affairs Minister, Ken Wyatt, set out the process for developing consultative bodies enshrined in legislation to give Indigenous people a way to be heard by government. Chief Political Correspondent Laura Tingle reports.
Let's put aside for a moment the angst on all sides about the voice and what exactly the call by Indigenous leaders gathered at Uluru in 2017 for a voice enshrined in the Constitution actually meant. Let's instead get back to the basic question of how Indigenous people get a hearing from government.
What I hear from people on the ground is, when are people going to listen to us about our issues? The regional voices will be important in how we shape key directions on policy, programs and meeting the needs within a region. And then ultimately the national voice will feed into government at that very senior level.
Being heard has certainly long been an issue for Indigenous people. When you look at the history, you can understand why the need to have a way to talk to the government was a central driver behind the call for a constitutionally recognised voice. In the 1980s, the Hawke government legislated for a body designed for just such a purpose, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders Commission, or ATSIC, just to see it abolished by the Howard government.
Once the government found that they no longer needed organisations like ATSIC, they just put the pen through it.
Roy R.C. is the current co-chair of the Prime Minister's Indigenous Advisory Council, established under Tony Abbott and maintained by his successors. Even this body has become something of a ghost ship, illustrating the problem Indigenous people have being heard.
We haven't met since February. We haven't received any correspondence from the Prime Minister's office.
Look, under two Prime Ministers, those bodies met frequently and had serious discussions with both Prime Minister Abbott and Prime Minister Turnbull. I participated in a couple of those meetings. They're supported and they are brought together to provide advice.
Send me a letter. Say, we no longer require your services.
Ken Wyatt says he plans to meet with Roy and his colleagues soon, but today's announcement was about establishing a whole new process, a 12-month consultation with Indigenous communities to come up with a model for a voice to government. Note the language here. At Uluru, the ask was for a First Nations voice enshrined in the Constitution. That morphed into a voice to Parliament, an idea that became politically toxic for Malcolm Turnbull when his Conservative detractors painted it as a threat to the democratic system.
Something that sort of sits beside or above the Senate. That idea just won't fly.
Barnaby Joyce, to his credit, has come out and said that he acknowledges that set back thinking and potential opportunities.
Now it has become a voice to government, which Ken Wyatt sees working across local, state and federal levels, advising leaders on Indigenous policy.
The request from the Uluru Statement is such a modest one. It is an advisory body to the Parliament, designed by the Parliament. It's briefed to be given by the Parliament. I cannot understand what the objection is to that.
But it won't be protected in the Constitution, just regular legislation.
The Prime Minister made it very clear that the voice would not be enshrined in the Constitution.
It's interesting, therefore, that the Minister has appointed Professor Marcia Langton to co-chair this new advisory group. She's on the record saying she hasn't changed her mind that the voice must be in the Constitution. In a statement, Langton and her co-chair Tom Calmer said, "While we support the Uluru Statement from the heart and constitutional reform to ensure that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have a voice in Parliament, the way in which Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are to be included in the decision-making process of all levels of government will be the priority in this process." Many in Indigenous Australia feel they are watching the whole voice idea from Uluru gradually whittled away. But they feel they have no choice but to stay on board with the process, to make the most of a badly made bed.
Ken Wyatt must be walking a very fine line. He knows the Aboriginal community, he's respected across the Aboriginal community, and he knows what the Uluru Statement says, and he knows how the Uluru Statement was developed. He's also got to keep in mind that he's a member of the government, and the question really needs to be put to the Prime Minister, because it seems to me that the Prime Minister is the bandmaster here.
At best, there's a hope that if legislated representative bodies can be established, they might eventually be included in the Constitution, perhaps even with the other ambitions of the Uluru Statement, processes for truth-telling and agreement-making.
There are other elements that are an ethos that prevails within the thinking of that statement. So it's challenging, but it's doable. And then once we've done that, we can then consider what else is in the mix that should be talked about.
Scott Morrison has an incredible opportunity here to embrace a voice in the Constitution and leave a legacy for this nation that will endure for a very long time.
Laura Tingle's still in Parliament House. Laura, there was a